Beautiful people of the internet, and welcome once more to our Sunday special live, which is made this week even more special with the addition of our guest superstar Guy Charison. For those who don't know Guy, he is former president of NAVA. Interesting story there. It used to be called head of NAVA until Guy turned up, and then it was El Presidente. So there you go. Guy is also one of the auctioneers and leads at Network Auctions, national auctioneer that relies on partnerships with agents throughout the country. It is arguable to say that they kicked off that being a popular thing to do in auctions before the modern method folks turned up. So the guys at Networks are all very much relationship orientated and based. Guy is also a freehold investor and also invests in life tenancies and I think maybe regulated tenancies. Guy correct me on that. But we have Guy today to discuss rental and leasehold and freehold reform, which is coming through at the moment. We, as always, have Adam the G Lawrence, who will be giving us the update on the economy, politics, and anything else that we should be thinking about rather than being worried about. And of course, you have myself and Piotr, who are just the eye candy sitting here with the smart people talking the smart stuff. So let's get this kicked off. Who wants to go first?
If you want me to, I'll try and charge through the supplement. If I've got background noise today, I apologise in advance, but I'm here on the fly, so I'll just do my best. So obviously, it was a week where they tucked in with the big R word came to fruition finally, for all the perma bears to be happy about as we slipped into a technical recession, as technical as you can imagine, really, given that we were 0.1% down for GDP in quarter three of last year, which is subject to revision. As I learned by revising it this week, for up to 3 years, the Office for National Statistics might revise that quarter, which, if I'm correct about this quarter that we're currently in, which doesn't look recessionary at all, it might not even be a recession in the history books by the time we get through it. I'm not sure how much that matters or not, because ultimately, politically, it's just one more tough thing for the incumbent party who, as you know, are not having the very best time at the moment. So a couple of by-elections weaved in there just to heap some more misery on the Conservatives for the week. The country really, really probably for the first time actually gets a taste of what the Labour Party are gearing up towards, which is, perhaps unsurprisingly, a few U-turns and not much money to spend, which of course they're blaming the Conservatives for crashing the economy, which is a strange choice of words given that we did grow 0.1% last year. And of course, last time they were in power, there was a recession quite a bit bigger than minus 0.1%, but there we go. So I'll keep it apolitical as usual. So what I did really this week was got stuck into the meat of it. So there were a lot of people saying, hold on a second, we look at GDP for recessions, which is true. That's just a dictionary definition. Why don't we look at GDP per capita, which has been down for a couple of years? That's a fair point. Although the same people who are saying we should use GDP per capita are normally the people saying we shouldn't use GDP as a measure because it isn't very good, which is kind of true, but that doesn't help really if you do it per capita. So where we've ended up, or where I ended up, was how about instead we look at this little known statistic that the Office for National Statistics bring out once a quarter. As usual, the really good stuff they don't tell us about often enough, and it's called the RHDI, or the Real Household Disposable Income. And there's quite a lot of things to like about that. Number one, it's real, as in it's adjusted for inflation. Number two, it's per household, which is what we're used to dealing with in the PRS. We like households because they're the people we give homes to. We don't really give homes necessarily just to individuals, although of course if you concentrate on things like HMO, then of course you probably do. And D, it's disposable, so it takes into account the tax position in the UK, which as we all know at the moment is pretty high. And C, it focuses on income, and people pay rents from income, generally speaking, or at least we want them to be. So I looked at that as a superior measure, which actually shows the real contraction between Q3 2021 and Q3 2022. So unlike probably anyone else in the broader media, what I'm saying is the real recession lasted, the way down at least was summer, autumn 21 to summer, autumn 22. And actually, from the point which we got rid of dear old Liz, the leftist, actually things have been on the up since then. Jeremy Hunt would be very pleased with my analysis, I'm sure, but it's not a line that most other people are going down. But what it really shows is things aren't anywhere near as bad as most are trying to report. Labour market is in reasonable health, actually. Unemployment ticked down to 3.8%, although the word unemployment probably masks the real issue in terms of employment itself and the amount of people on long-term sick, which is a big problem for the government. It's a big amount to carry, and it really just speaks to the state of the health service at the moment, apart from anything else. Inflation was mixed messages, pretty sideways, but below consensus. Is that still because consumption's falling apart? Possibly a little bit, although all of the real-time metrics for January don't look too bad at all. And another way of looking at it is that we're probably not still in recession from a technical perspective, because I expect GDP to grow this quarter, subject to nothing terrible happening in the next 6 weeks or so, which of course is always the caveat. And those were the big two things that came out this week, apart from the GDP numbers, which really we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at that real disposable income, in my opinion. And the very last bit, apart from anything else, the bond yields, of course. Bond yields wise, we closed the week at 4.006%. So it's territory we prefer to be on the other side of that 4% line, but I think we're near the top of the range we should be trading in at the moment. And it's kind of this death by 1,000 cuts that's taking us slowly towards the lower end of that 3.5% to 4% range I've been talking about. I think probably it's the worst week this year so far for mortgage pricing, but it's a slow and very, very boring and very, very limited game. But I'm going to leave my bit there for the moment and then chip in when we've got into the promised meat of today's discussion and hand over to Guy and Piotr, folks. So
Brilliant.
That was sufficient.
Nice one. Thanks for the quick summary, Adam, and keeping it to a few minutes. Very rare. And we've got some.
Don't get used to it. You know, there's no guarantee that will happen again.
We've got some guests on watching us as well. This is Richard, current president of Nova, and I'm pretty sure we've got a lot more people: Ivona, Dominic, Tim, James, and Joe, and a lot others. Helen, Graham. So good to see everyone. But yeah, let's get to the meat of this discussion. Guy, welcome to our show. Usually you're the one putting the comments in. Today you're the one generating the comments. Somehow we can't hear you for some reason. I don't know if it's... no. Some reason. Maybe it's the volume button or something. I don't know what, but...
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now, yes.
Okay, let me just plug this in again, because I know you asked me to try and wear the headphones. Does that work?
Yeah, it works. Perfect.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very much. Nice to see you all, and good to hear from everybody, and to see that Richard's on there as well. So as a colleague of mine, as well as at Network Auctions, as well as being president of NAVA this year. It's very difficult to speak about the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Bill 2023-24 as it's being introduced, because we don't really know what's going to happen yet. We know what's being proposed. We've got an election so close to us. You know, when's the election going to be? I mean, if it was May, which still could be the case, I don't think it would be, but then nothing would happen, because it's not going to be introduced in this parliamentary session. I do wonder and worry about poor old Mr. Michael Gove, the Right Honourable Michael Gove. I think he seems to have forgotten he's a Conservative in some of the ideas that he's got in the legislation. I've watched a number of the parliamentary debates and some of the committee stages, and it seems that a lot of the MPs from both sides are keen to hit us with a stick, hit the freeholders with a stick, but they don't really know what they're doing. They just want to give everyone a whack but without really understanding what they're doing. Leasehold is very complicated, but it's clear that they want to deal with bad property managers and the sale of onerous leasehold houses. So I think a lot of this is being caused by, I'm sorry to say, but Taylor Wimpey and Persimmon Homes in particular, who've really introduced the sale of leasehold houses in a way in the last sort of 10, 15 years that they are very, very onerous leases and exploit it for everybody. I think there's 4.9 million leasehold properties in the UK. 1.2 million of those are houses. The majority of the houses, I mean, you probably all bought leasehold houses, particularly you, Adam, up in the Midlands and the North. And most of the leasehold houses you buy are probably 999-year leases with, you know, £1 or £2 or a guinea or something ground rent. Now, they're not onerous. They're no great problem. You can normally buy the freeholds there for, I mean, technically they're worth, you know, £100 or something. But, you know, often if you pay 500, including your costs, you're happy just to get the freehold. So that's really what's making the government take a broader look at this issue. Michael Gove will probably say that he wants to see the leasehold property ownership just fairer in England and Wales. Of course, this doesn't affect Scotland. But there are a number of proposals, and we just don't know what's going to be the final outcome. The worst possible outcome would be that all ground rents are put to zero, and that there's the removal of the marriage value. That's the value that increases the property's total value once the lease extended, and it's shared between the leaseholder and the freeholder in the lease extensions at the moment. So that would be the worst scenario. But you know, always with politics, there's always some sort of compromise. And every time there's been leasehold reform before, and I don't think this will be the case this time, but I'm just saying, every time there's been leasehold reform before, ultimately the freeholders have somehow benefited. You know, for those of us who are older like me, I can remember selling properties with a 60-year lease, and people would happily sell those to a first-time buyer. The Abbey National, as it was in those days before it was Santander, would happily give you a mortgage on those. But now, you know, if you've got an 80-year lease, we know that's the number, that's a cut-off. But I think now, if you've got what I'm calling a double-digit lease, you know, even if you've got 99 years, it's not enough. People are not interested. You just imagine what happens. All new leases are now for 990 years. So as soon as we're in a situation where even if you're selling a lease with a 125-year lease, which would have been considered a long lease, you know, just 2 years ago, people are going to say it's not enough. You know, why do I have 120? My friend's got 990. So that's going to be a problem. I think there are some good points that might come out of the legislation, and that is to do with managing agents. Some of the managing agents, as we know, are very, you know, they're really bad, and they charge excessive amounts for charging, for providing management information. I suspect all of you and our listeners, there are certain properties that you might be interested in buying with a leasehold, but as soon as you find out the freeholder is, you know, X, Y, or Z, you know those names, you're just going to go, sorry, I'm not interested.
Yeah,
you know,
that's one of the things, like when we review things on the auction buy app, like this is the first thing we look at, like who's the freeholder, because this is like saves so much time, because certain freeholders you just don't want to touch. And then there are certain ones that you will actually go through the hassle of working out how much it would be to renew the lease and stuff like that. Yeah.
So which for us, we understand it and we'll avoid them. But for the average buyer who's just buying a home, they can get into that trap very easily with not realizing. And I do think, you know, one of the problems has been lawyers, because they don't want to be saying, don't touch this freeholder with a barge pole. They just won't say that. And then, you know, going back to, you know, one wonders, going back to the sort of Taylor, Wimpey and Persimmon and others, how much liability the lawyers have. A lot of those lawyers, I mean, lawyers will always try and, you know, squirm out, get out of things. But, you know, a lot of those lawyers were recommended by Persimmon. You know, Persimmon took them out for lunch and said, you know, if you recommend, we're going to recommend you to act for buyers. Just put these onerous leases through. I'm sure they didn't use those words, but that's what they've done. So why they don't have liabilities, I really don't know. So we just don't really know what the outcome's going to be. But turning to the potential loss, or as I would say, theft, so in the premiums for lease extensions, I did hear, excuse me, last week that the Treasury are quite concerned because they're concerned that they might have to pay compensation to the freeholders. I don't know if you've heard about this, Adam, but I've heard that a number of 30 billion that the Treasury has advised the committee about, that they might have to end up paying compensation if they were to go to the full extent. Now that is a number. Sorry, Adam, go on.
I haven't heard the number, Guy, but I'm not surprised to hear it's in that. And I think the problem politically is, like it always is as you correctly say, there's some bad freeholders that make headlines, but they are still the minority, and the vast majority is pension fund owned investments. So how clever or not would it be to take 25 billion or whatever out of UK pension funds at any time, let alone in an election year?
Yeah,
I mean, it's the last bullet in the chamber, isn't it, really?
Yeah. And I think the word marriage value is a word that has caused a lot of problems. The word marriage value will be removed. But what it's going to be replaced with, it will be replaced with something else. And they'll find another way of describing it. The deferment rate, which is effectively the compensation paid to the freeholder for the loss of value, that's probably going to be changed because there's been a sort of this established Sportelli number. So that could be possibly, and depending on, that's really, I'm going to have to defer to someone like Adam, who's an economist, to know where that number is going to be. And that number could favour a very sort of small, it's very small amounts of change can affect the premium very substantially. So you never know, that gain that could end up favouring the freeholder without the politicians even realising.
Well, my understanding of the initial draft, which I thought was quite sensible, was almost like you've got to remember how these things are calculated. So it's generally a discounted cash flow style calculation.
Yes.
And the point really, in the first place, was supposed to be the newer build stuff, there won't be any ground rents. So that's going to change things apart from marriage values. By forcing the 990 years, it means that the renewals are effectively, it's virtual freehold stuff anyway. And it's fixing the problem going forward without going backwards and trying to be retrospective. And I struggle to see how they will be too, as you say, it might be more repackaging and rebadging than it would be, because no one in this current environment is going to sign off anything that looks like 3 billion to freeholders, let alone 30 billion. Because the money's just not there. Yes. And with Labour cancelling their plans to spend 28 billion a year, or halving them at the moment, to be more accurate, lumping on an extra 30 billion, even if it is a one-off, is just not going to be politically viable, even if it was economically viable, which it isn't.
That's absolutely right. And so even if it didn't get through in this parliamentary timetable, and then say Labour were to come in, which obviously is the betting odds, they can still have the same information from the Treasury. So I think they would want to drop it. So I think personally, I think what's going to outcome, there is going to be an outcome. Michael Gove will be able to stand up and look and say, I have done reform. I've changed it. But in reality, I'm not quite sure it's going to be as aggressive as the people might think. But it does, in the last months, since the King's speech, the value of freeholds has definitely fallen very substantially. Now, before we always used to talk, if you were selling, obviously it's all subject to how long the leases are, but in general, the actual ground rent part, you might have paid, say, 18 times or something like that. You've probably seen that, or 20 times, and there were some more. And then I think it became established about 15 times a year ago, and now it's probably back to 10 times if you've got long leases. So you've lost a lot of value. Freeholders have lost a lot of value already. So I think they are at a low, and they will go back, just because once the uncertainty is gone and the certainty is back of knowing exactly where you are, however bad you are, they'll go back. Because if you can buy them at 10 times, it's got to be a pretty good buy, isn't it?
Yeah. So if William Hill put like outcome kind of predictions and allowed people betting, what would be the 4 or 5 outcomes that William Hill would put that would actually be like clickable and measurable that people could bet on?
Well, I don't think you can bet on anything because there were 5 potential options. I mean, the worst. So you're going from no change at all to the worst way of being. All ground rents are zeroed, and there's going to be no premium to do a lease extension. But I cannot see that politically. That to me is theft. And you've also got, you imagine the Duke of Westminster. I mean, I'm sure he's tuned in today watching us, and I'm sure he's going to make a comment in a minute. But I mean, but can you imagine the amount of wealth that he, and as Adam's pointed out, the pension funds have got in this? They're going to be certainly canvassing behind the scenes. I did hear that there's a group, the Duke of Westminster and the like, have got it ready to take to the European Court of Human Rights. I assume we're still in that. I'm confused whether we're still in it.
Yes, yes, we are.
They're going to take it to the Court of Human Rights because it is theft. And of course, some people, it's always just those few bad people, but a lot of us have invested in ground rents for a long time, and some people have invested in them for generations. Some people, this is generational wealth for a lot of people, and to have it taken away would be wrong. And even then, I think the thought of the government compensating the Duke of Westminster, that would be unpalatable as well.
But I just raised the valid point that even when John McDonnell was the Shadow Chancellor, and they were talking about a whole variety of things, such as extending right to buy to the PRS, which was one of their ridiculous ideas. Even John McDonnell confirmed that the Treasury would compensate or make the gap up so that the private sector would not need to bear the loss if they were selling properties at a discount. So when a Marxist thinks like that, you can be fairly sure that Guy's worst case scenario isn't happening. And typically in these sort of situations, I think the sharpest people are buying more freeholds because you cross the fact that the risk-free rate of return has gone up so much because the rates have gone up so much. With this backdrop, you're talking a relative high in the interest rate and a time when most people will just, not that necessarily selling off what they've got, but they're certainly not buying it. I mean, it's a terrible time to sell a freehold, and it's probably a phenomenal time to buy one. The difficulty behind some of that being, depending on what your financing structure looks like, because if you want to borrow money against freeholds at the moment, I don't know what the funders are doing, but I can imagine they're running and hiding quite significantly. So it's got to be cash-only stuff for the minute, I guess, Guy.
Well, I think absolutely, it's definitely going to be cash-only. But certainly with network auctions, we've had a lot of inquiries, and we've also got our little other brand, ground rent auctions, and we're getting a lot of inquiries. And there's some people, you just tell them, and they go, "Sorry, no way can I let it go for that now when it was worth double a few years ago." But there are some people who say, "Oh my God, I've read everything. I think it's going to be the worst case scenario. Just sell it." So there's such a variety. It's so up in the air. We need to come back to discuss this in 6 months' time or whenever it's going to be legislation.
This is just like the best Brexit bills were done in sort of 2017 and 2018 because they were driven out of people's fear, saying dump it now. It's the old, buy low, sell high, and often people do the reverse, unfortunately, and that's where we are. That's what makes a market, isn't it? So that's it.
But it's still amazing how many ground rents we sell at auction where the lessees haven't taken up their rights. You would think, we just sold one very recently, a nice part of London. The flats are 500,000 or 600,000. You would think they would just lap that up to buy that. They had the opportunity of buying that for ultimately, I think the price was 18,000. That's not a lot of money between 3 flats that are worth 500,000 or 600,000. One of which was a short lease. You just wonder why lessees have no interest.
It's just got to be the knowledge gap, hasn't it, Guy? It's got to be the knowledge gap, surely.
Yeah, completely the knowledge gap. They just don't understand the benefit of. A lot of people will see it as okay, I'm now a freeholder. What are my responsibilities? What roles do I have? How is that going to complicate my life as someone who just opens the door and lives in the property? rather than these are the benefits of being the freeholder. This is the freedom we have. This is the control we have over the asset. So yeah, I think no one, when they get that letter, nobody is thinking, let me get some independent legal advice before I make a decision as to what to do. And I think that really is a big part of the problem.
I think so. Also, sorry, Piotr.
Go ahead.
I was just about to go after you.
Go ahead, Si.
Okay, I'll go then. So I think also you get a situation where, in this particular example, there were 3 flats, 2 of which had been newly refurbished and sold. They're 125-year leases. The buyers of those were probably first-time buyers. They were probably maxed out on their financial situation and probably didn't have the spare cash to park. The one that was a short lease absolutely should have had this. I say short lease, it was 73 years. They should have bought that without question, because the lease extension premium would be substantially. The lease extension premium would have been about 45,000 for that flat, and they could have bought
plus
cost, and they could have bought that for 18,000, but they didn't. But you also have, once you have an inequity of the different lengths of leases, it's very difficult to say to people to get their head around. You've got to pay 10%. You've got to pay 10%, but you've got to pay 80%. People think that's unfair, although in actual fact, it's completely fair, it's completely justifiable, and we understand it. But people just don't. It's very, very difficult to explain that to people.
Yeah, and we had a taster session for the Auction Buyers Club, and one of the person brought a property which is a freehold, I think of 8 flats somewhere up north. It's up north, but all of the flats are about 45 to 49.
Wow.
Years left. So basically, they're not worth much. Say 40k for a full lease flat, like let's say 40k, but still that lease extension would be about 5k plus costs.
Yeah.
Maybe 4k, maybe 3k, but the whole freehold was offered with a guide price of something like £1,000.
Wow.
It's ridiculous, and the lessees did not take up their rights. This is like the most incredible thing ever. Literally,
well, that's when they're really likely not to have the money, though. And the thing is, you often see these when the premium is a real fiddly amount. I mean, we bought a number of them where we might bought the leasehold where it's 81 years left or 79 years left, or we're on one side of that marriage value equation. And if the freehold is difficult, remember that the cost-wise, they can be quoting way, way more than the premium. And there's very little stopping the freeholder, or not even the freeholder, but just the lawyers from absolutely gouging it. And we've had a number where we've not walked away. We already own the asset. We've said, well, you know what? We're not worried. We can get financing against it. So if you want to wait 35 years to have this conversation, that's up to you. No problem. Then just use that as a bit of a negotiating tactic. But it can be. I've seen some pretty horrific, for little blocks of 4 or something where the legals costs are coming in, say 15k when you include the VAT and things like that. And it's like, well, hold on a second, guys, because like you say, if the flats are only worth 40k a throw, how do you justify chucking that amount of cash into it? Really?
I mean, you can go to the Leasehold Valuation Tribunal on costs. You can do that currently. I mean, I actually had a situation where I've got a couple of flats I owned for years, and the freehold is owned by the London Diocesan Fund, so i.e. the Church of England. And the costs there are horrendous. I did lease extensions, and the actual costs were the same amount as the premium. And I actually, a friend of mine is very high up in the Church of England, and I mentioned it to her, and she took it up to some extent. But the trouble is, they have top London lawyers. They're using top London valuers, and they're all gouging, as you said, Adam. And they're taking far too much out of it. I actually. She then put me in touch with the bishop who's in charge of the Church of England property, and it's a lady bishop. And basically, she just kicked it to the side, and it is a club that is all part of their own, little club. It's our friends who are the top London lawyers, and it's just disgusting. As I pointed out to them, look, I paid it. I wanted to do the lease extension, but if I was a normal person living in that flat, really struggling to get my £5,000 together for my premium, and then to have another 5,000 in costs, that is absolutely outrageous, and it's something that the Church of England should be disgusted about.
Well, this is very
I'd say
similar
that,
to
I've never
we've got
been
a
to England.
we've got a leasehold number of parking spaces at the rear of a commercial property that we own, and in between the actual freehold that we own and the leasehold parking spaces, there's some green space, which the freeholder, who's the local council as it goes, don't take care of that land, and we would love to put a few extra parking spaces on there, and also maintain the trees and the grass that are not maintained currently and fall all over our lessees' car parking spaces that annoys them. But because that's a PFI contract, we're in a similar situation where the Magic Circle firm represent the local authority. There's a nested number of leaseholds in there, and we were told it's basically 25 grand to open up a conversation about it. I mean, this is a piece, the land itself is maybe worth 5 grand because of where it is and what it is. And it just means you just can't do anything, unfortunately. And that is one of the things that probably we would all like to see picked up within the Act, because only a very small number of people, bit of a cartel or whatever you want to call it, really benefit in those situations, you know?
And other things slightly aside, but I do think that a lot of local authorities have got assets they don't even know. I'm sure that the council taxpayers would love to have someone go into the council and to understand some of the assets they've got and sell. I'm not saying sell the family silver, but I'm saying to sell little bits and pieces like that would be no loss to the council in revenue, but it would be a great asset to the council taxpayers.
Look at the Birminghams of the world. I'm sure the Section 151 officer would love you to just do a bit of pro bono work for them, guys, and talk about how much all that might be worth. Yeah,
quite. I mean, you know, any valuer, would be delighted to go into any local authority, give them free advice on the basis they would sell the assets.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
there's
quite
been a lot of
amazing.
conversation. Sorry, Piotr. There's been a lot of conversation recently about the use of council land and how the council planners stand in the way of the councils actually delivering social housing projects. And you have to think, you're on the same team. You have delivery that you have to put forward. So they should be working together. They shouldn't be, greasing palms and doing all that other kind of stuff that is suspected of private developers. But there shouldn't be all of these hoops and things to jump through, when at the end of the day, there is a housing shortage. The most accessible land to fill some of these quotas is council-owned land. And the fact that the planners are the ones that are standing in the way of this, you see it a lot. It's just really poor mismanagement. And you can apply that statement to anything in government today. The Bank of England is really bad mismanagement. It's the transport sector. It's really bad mismanagement.
Yeah.
The NHS, it's really bad mismanagement.
Well, if you think back, Joe, a few weeks ago when we were talking about the asylum seeker backlog being solved, and the fact that you get 7 days once your asylum, your application is rubber stamped, which is about 75+% of asylum applications, then ultimately you're given 7 days to find a property, and all that does. And then suddenly, a few weeks later, guess what? Surprise, surprise. Now it's in the news about the incredible increase in temporary accommodation. Now, there have been 30-odd thousand Section 21 served by all accounts, of which about 5,000 or 6,000 have been effected, and they're blaming that. But the temporary accommodation figures are up 50,000, which surprisingly is in concert with the number of asylum applications that have been approved. But nobody understands this stuff, and everybody just goes, "Oh, it's not in my department anymore. The Home Office have done their bit, so it's not the local authority." But of course, what ends up happening is central government pick up the tab, and now there's I can't remember the name of the fund. When Michael Gove embarrassed himself on Laura Koonsberg last week, it was, wasn't it? He did refer to the fact that central government were effectively picking up the tab. But some of the temporary accommodation figures are up 67% in 12 months. And to try and blame the Renters Reform Bill and Section 21 is a complete and utter red herring. It's completely the wrong reason as to why it's happened. But this is what is so frustrating, because going back to what Guy was saying, they don't really understand. I mean, leasehold is really complicated, right? They don't even understand the private rental sector, which is not inherently complicated, realistically. Nowhere near as complex as block management and tenancy and landlord in freehold situations. And they don't even understand that. So you wonder what hope we've got. And to be fair to Gove, although he's a difficult character, he's a clever guy. And really what he should be doing is communicating what the problem is, framing it properly, and then handing it over for that negotiation piece that Guy was talking about, in my opinion.
The problem that you have is that there is exceptionally poor leadership. And this isn't just a dig at the UK government. This is poor leadership globally. When you have politicians that would prefer to slick back into doublespeak and diversion and look over here while we're doing this over here, not a single politician for as long as my living memory, and that goes back almost 40 years, has ever said, I cocked up. This is where we went wrong. And this is how we fix it. There is zero leadership in today's society. And if you have zero leadership, you're directionless. Then you open up the realms of chaos theory. And the other thing that you see a lot of is because the people that are put in these positions of power are not specialists in those positions that they take. The person who is the head of transport knows nothing about transport and migratory kind of metrics. The person in a head that's the head of education knows nothing about education outside of the education that they had taken. When you have that, and you have shadowy figures that operate within local government that are in the bureaucracies that are essentially telling these people this is what you should be looking at, are people who have just climbed up the rungs instead of people who are qualified specialists who have external training, etc., means that you're in this whole pit of nobody knows exactly what the other is doing. And when you fall outside of that, you're then sat in the realms of unintended consequences, the realm, the world, the reality of unintended consequences. And the problem of that is that these things are absolutely perceptible and understandable if you're aware of what the knock-on effects of these actions are. But the problem is, they're like, let's take this action, let's get the spin doctors in to sell it this way, and at the very end, we're going to be left with X. Well, you may be left with X. You're going to be left with X to the power of 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that you didn't even consider because they fall within the realms of the laws of unintended consequences.
And I think if you come back to the, Guy's framed the discussion really, really well, in as much as I think the answer can probably come out of today's conversation, realistically, in as much as you could probably do with some fixed price tariffs or schedules, maybe depending on where in the country the property is, that might be reasonable. So there could be a cap, or there could be simply a fixed price. So fixed price work would be picked up. Conveyancing gets done, even though it's not high margin work, So you would find property departments who would do it, and there would be that transparency that's missing. And if you think about the joke that is the government how to rent guide, for example, we could probably do with one of these that was, 10 pages long for leaseholders, so they would understand some of the positions that they're put in these situations. And it might be a bit of a difficult pill to swallow for people like Persimmon, but let's face it, they've got their profits over the last 10 or 15 years the Help to Buy has transferred to them to maybe pay some compensation out if that's what they need to do, even if that compo is to the pension funds or whoever have bought the ground rents that they put together that were, let's say, fairly egregious in the first place. And there's probably a negotiated settlement. And as I think Guy framed it really well when he said, look, politics is about compromise. We're not going to end up at A, we're not going to end up at E. Assuming that Sunak doesn't want to play Russian roulette and call an election in May, which I know some people are still convinced there's going to be an early one, but it would be the strangest political moves. I mean, I couldn't fathom why you would do that at this stage. I think he needs Jeremy Hunt to come with a rabbit out the hat next month and let 6 months to let that bed in and hope there's the tiniest amount of feel-good factor or whatever. But the answers are probably here, and it's probably circles back round to this is probably why the sharp people are buying at the moment, if they can afford the liquidity with a bit of a lending gap in the freehold lending market support at the moment.
Yeah. Jay, it's interesting. You talk about the current crop of politicians worldwide. It's a very interesting. I mean, we've got an American election this year, and if you're 80 years old, don't bother standing. It's just madness. And in the UK, I mean, the names. I've got on my bookshelf behind. You can see I've got lots of. I collect political signed books, and I've got a Churchill and the Thatcher, the Douglas Hurd, the Nigel Lawsons. Those people were just I'm sorry to say, and there are some good MPs I know, but they were in a different class, and there were some from the Labour side as well. They were just in a different class. That they really wanted the right thing. They weren't going to be put off by spin doctors. They were going to do the right thing consistently, and that at the moment, they say one thing, and if the media, then they'll have the little 25-year-old come in and say, well, the media didn't like that, the press is against you, and then they'll just change what they say. And how healthy is that? It's not.
I put a couple of bits on LinkedIn this week there. Sorry, Jake, go on.
I was going to say, the politicians that you've named, Guy, those were not ideologues. These were statespeople that understood you had to make tough decisions and follow through critically with what you had said you were going to do for the not just the, doesn't matter about the government, for the state and for the people existing within the state to thrive.
Yes.
And you don't have that now because there is ideologies, You're talking about the far left in Labour, and you're talking about the far right and the Conservatives. And you're talking about, all these different types of people. Well, the reality is the reason why nobody is turning out to vote. Obviously, nobody is a massive exaggeration, but the turnouts for voting at the moment are half what they were 3-5 years ago. That's not accidental. That's the people telling you. It's not even we're not even in a position where we can choose the better of two evils, because you're not evil, you're just grossly incompetent, and you're ideologues to boot, which helps nobody.
Well, I said this before, but when Starmer was the DPP, he padded his expense account just like anybody else did, and his tax return was released in the last couple of weeks along with Rishi's. And there was a lot of pushback about Sunak paying 23% marginal tax. But Starmer's was 25% because his major league tax contribution was from a capital gain from a sale disposal for his father's estate. So it doesn't put a lot of clear water between the two of them. Yeah. Although Sunak's, I would argue, is more sustainable CGT income. But the point is, it's the wrong conversation because most people don't understand CGT, and they don't understand that corporation tax has already been paid. They don't understand that good old George withdrew indexation relief, which, going back to Guy's initial point, is theft. Indexation relief being withdrawn in 2017 alongside the amount of inflation we've had over the last 6 or 7 years, the amount of CGT that's been stolen effectively from the inflationary effect will be tens of billions of pounds. But again, no one's going to argue about that because it's technically the wealthy. All people want to do is put CGT up, which is not the way to encourage investment in assets. Neither is the way to encourage it. Retrospectively tax them, or as Guy correctly says, steal the bloody money out of people's pockets, most of whom will be pensioners. It's totally crackers. Totally crackers.
Hey, Adam, have you got a thought when the general election might be? I actually, sadly enough, looked earlier in the week. I was having a little look at the dates of the all the party conferences and seeing when the date could be. I mean, I was thinking, would Rishi want to do it before the party conference season or after? I think probably after, because of the way the parliamentary timetable is. I'm sort of thinking that October is a traditional date. October, the last election was in December, but there's very few elections ever in December. That was a masterstroke by Boris, as it happens. People might not want to think it like that, but he had an 80 majority, so it was a masterstroke.
He knew how to win. He knew how to win elections, Guy. At the end of the day, without a shadow of a doubt. So I think you've nailed it in terms of what's the key thing that's left is the conference side of things. So what would be? Is he more likely to go after or before? Then we have to start thinking about budgetary statements and things like that as well. Because do you want to be an outgoing parliament with a budget yet to think about, or do you just want to cancel the budget altogether? So my suspicion is Q4 of this year, but that conference season will determine things. I actually think when we get to April, and again, I think the general public has framed the debate completely incorrectly, because when we get to April, we've got a giant increase in income for households in real terms, and I mean gigantic, and it's the worse off that will benefit. But I think you've all kind of nailed where the other. Well, Jeremy Hunt is amazing at cooking the books, right? And I don't mean that as cynically as it sounds. He's a proper scientist of. If you think of, he or whoever's working behind him is the best manipulator of the system that I've ever seen, right? And you go back to some of the politicians you mentioned. In fairness, in the 90s, one of the things we didn't do well is manage the economy because there were such really big changes. And one of the smartest things Labour did was to introduce the Independent Bank of England and put some real heavyweight thinking behind the Bank of England, even though I'm very critical of Andrew Bailey. As typically the guy with the top job is the face rather than the real talent. But the people behind him in the MPC are the real talent. And luckily, he only has 1 vote out of 9 and the governor's influence, so that he doesn't cock it up as much as he otherwise would, realistically. So I think what you're probably going to find is that it's going to depend on, back to Jay's point, who's going to engineer the science of the turnout? Where do you want the turnout to be if you're the Conservative Party? How do you deal with reform, and where's that going to hurt? And I think Labour's one other unspoken problem at the moment is we need to rejoin the customs union, probably, because most people who were involved in the Brexit debate kind of accepted that actually the common market was a good thing. The problem became the political overreach and everything else involved with the EU and the political direction of Brussels and all the rest of it in general. But if Labour were to come out and say they were going to rejoin the customs union, they might lose half of their voter base, because as we know, half of the Leave voters were Labour voters. Yeah. So where does that leave them? So I don't know why the Conservatives aren't pushing that argument at the moment, personally, but there's a few tactics that are going to come out of the woodwork. Do they want a low turnout? In which case, why would you historically not have an election when Boris did? Well, there's been concerns about turnout, and there's concerns about if the weather's bad and all the rest of it. But actually, what favours the incumbents? They're going to have to pull every trick they've got left in order to... So do you want it in November or December when there's floods and potential global warming headlines? Or do you want to try September and front run the conference season? And it's probably, it feels like about 50-50 in my mind at the moment, guys. But September or November feels like the date to me.
We've also got boundary changes as well. And I actually was looking at the boundary changes because I'm sad at these things. But the Bristol seat, which was it called Kings? What was it called? How can we
Kingswood, is it? Is it Kingswood?
I want to say Kingswood. Was it anyway? The Kingswood, yeah, the Bristol seat. So Labour won that, but they would have, if Reform UK and the Conservative numbers were just almost equal. So if Reform hadn't have been there, that might have made it a different outcome. But that seat, this is going to be the last time that's fought. They're changing all the Bristol seats, and I understand that this time. Now, obviously, the Boundary Commission is independent, but this time it is more likely to favour the Conservatives than it's going to favour Labour for probably the first time. So yeah, there aren't going to be so many little nuances. It's always, as I always say with the general election, it's really 650 elections, and you never quite know what's going to happen. But I would have thought September wouldn't be a bad choice. And I was going to ask you, Adam, you mentioned about the tax. People are going to really feel the tax difference in their pocket, but how quickly will they feel it, and how quickly will they forget it? Because that's the other thing is, if they're going to feel it and then think suddenly the Conservatives have, my friend, they've done well, is there an advantage for going early? That gain might be something for September rather than November. Would you?
I think it might be fair to say that, and I think we're not just talking about tax. Remember, minimum wage is up 9.8% in April. So I think you've got to look at the property market at the moment. If you look to a really broad brush implication, people have got problems where they're dropping off cheap old fixed rates, right? But if we focus on first-time buyers, we had a year last year where there was an awful amount of uncertainty, and still first-time buyers were the biggest players in that marketplace because they're heavily motivated. So now, compared to 2023, rates are actually lower than they were. So there's a lot of recency comparison that goes on, rather than thinking about, oh, well, in 2021, I could get a mortgage at 1.2%. It doesn't matter. It's gone, right? So if you go track back to my argument this week from the supplement, if Q3 21 to Q3 22 were the hard times, then as we benchmark against how bad it was 18 months ago, 12 months ago, if the lower income households get to April and they've got a significant increase in their wages, and inflation is looking like, even if I'm right, it's tracking in the 3 to 4% category. If things are up 10%, then ultimately you're in a pretty rosy situation. You've got the best real terms pay rise ever. that's what the headlines will be saying. And if you are actually feeling that in the pocket, and there is another little tweak downwards next month by Jeremy Hunt, which looks, they've got to do something. What they can do will be politically interesting, but you could have a real feel-good factor. And traditionally, you would say 3 to 6 months would be the time that people would have to kick in, have a good summer, let people have a good summer if it is going to be good, and then that's pointing more and more to September, isn't it, when you think about it that way? But you've got to call it in the anticipate. It's a bit like the Bank of England meeting tomorrow and saying, well, let's put the rates down because things are probably on the way down and it's okay. You've got to take a risk at some point during an election campaign, and you might have to call it 3 months before something has really kicked in, and that will be the real skillful part of it. But yeah, when I think about it, September's probably favourite for me. Yeah.
The minimum time for an election is 3 weeks. You can call a 3-week election. I mean, that's the shortest.
Well, going back to every trick in the book, do you think that would favour the incumbents if you did do a 3-week? Because Labour don't really want to release too many policies because they're just going to try and win by turning up at the moment. I mean,
yeah. And I think the Labour Party. I mean, look, we always say the Conservative Party is a broad church, and it is split on a lot of things. Between the One Nation Conservatives and the Thatcherites. But Labour is equally split. And I think there's some faces that in the Labour Party, yes, whilst Starmer looks very middle management and he's all that sort of nice guy, but there's an awful lot of lefties in there that if the Conservatives can get some stuff on them, will not play well for them. I mean, it's a bit like the 93 election, was it with the Welsh windbag? He thought he'd won, didn't he? And
campaign on ice, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think you're quite right. Labour has still got problems in. Look at what happened with the Rotherham MP and the anti-Semitic conversation and all the rest of it, which is obviously even more pertinent now than it has been for many years. Yeah. They've still got their laundry to sort out, and there is that problematic faction, which I'd argue. I mean, the disappointment for me about Sunak is he hasn't had the political strength to pretty much ignore some of the Rees-Mogg Truss popcorn stuff or whatever the stuff that's been going on recently. Yeah. Jay's point about weak leadership. Sunak's a traditional weak leader, whereas someone like Trump is a personality defective leader in many ways. Yeah. And the problem is, although he's someone who gets results, it's what you sacrifice in the medium term. I'm having this conversation in the United States, so I better be a bit careful. I'll keep my voice down. But that's your problem. And then the alternative is you've got someone who arguably is not cognitively capable of holding a conversation at the moment, and it's a terrible state of affairs. But you are lacking that backbone that I think people want to see. I'm not sure that reform are the answer, but I'm not sure there is an answer because, as you say, Starmer looks like a spitting image writer's gift to me. I mean, if John Major was grey, you need a more boring colour than grey to be Keir Starmer. I don't know what colour that is, but Yeah,
I think the Pinnock election, I think I said 93, I think it was 92, of course, wasn't it? But going back to Rochdale, that's going to be an interesting election. I mean, you've got, has anyone read about the candidates there? I mean, there's this by-election coming up in Rochdale. I mean, the Conservative is clean. He was Mr. Rochdale 2020. The Liberal Democrat is clean. He's raised well, but all the others are absolutely tarnished. It's quite unbelievable. We know that the Labour Party candidate is tarnished, and the Starmer withdrew his support for him for his anti-Semitic things. The Green Party, I don't know if you noticed, but the Green Party candidate, the Greens, the lovely Greens, even their party have withdrawn their support from him. Then one of the other candidates, I think the Reform candidate, was a former MP for that constituency before the current, the previous member, Tony Lloyd, passed away. And he was done for issues with 17-year-old girls. And then you've got, it's just unbelievable. It's worth reading. You've only got two candidates that are actually clean. Who's going to win that election? I could see the Conservatives winning that.
It wouldn't surprise. I mean, the thing is, a lot of the press has commented on, what the big swing is to Labour and all the rest of it. But as you've correctly identified as well, it's the turnout that's the real problem, and that will be that will be causing some really interesting, because this adds a, going back to Piotr's comment about William Hill and where's the book and all the rest of it. What turnout adds is randomness, and what people don't like is randomness, apart from anything else. Because one good, as you say, there are some good individual MPs. They tend to be the people we haven't heard of, unless we're very well researched day to day, who are politically active above the local government level and doing things for their area within Parliament. But those are people who can, if you've got the right people, make a difference on the ground, because people will ignore. I mean, look what happened in Uxbridge, which was seen as a vote against ULEZ and all the rest of it. You have got things that, I mean, ULEZ has really upset a few people in London, which should be a real Labour stronghold. So there are factors here at play that make it very complex to try and forecast what's going to go on.
The Conservatives in Uxbridge did choose a local candidate, and that obviously played well for them, as well as the ULEZ thing. But they, but I always think with local candidates, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, but you only choose a local candidate for a by-election. That's like a traditional thing that people, that parties do, and I can understand why. But my worry for local candidates is, are you getting the best? Are you getting the cream of the crop, which we really should be getting? I don't know. That's just a.
We're back to the problem of whether it exists anymore. When I commented on Starmer's tax return this week, I said the thing that really strikes me is, look at the comparative pittance, I'm afraid to say, that you get paid for doing that job. And look at the ministerial. It's not enough money, especially in the day and age where executive pay has blown up. C-level pay has blown up. Parliamentary pay has been suppressed. We already pay very poorly for a Western democracy. And it reminds me of Oxford University. You're expected to do stuff just because it's Oxford University, not because it's a potentially worthwhile living. If you're a lecturer at Oxford, you might earn a third of what you might earn somewhere else in the UK, and a tenth of what you might earn if you went to Harvard. Now, at some point, that has to be a problem, because economics and the free market takes over, and the same applies to politics, I think, to be honest. But I would say that I'm an economist, right?
Yeah, of course.
Well, what would be a really interesting way, and I'm probably not surprised that the Nordic regions haven't done this already, but your ministerial pay, whether it's collective as in national government or local government, should be based on they've got those indices about how happy your population is, how the growth that you've created. It should be performance and competency based. It shouldn't just be a case of, the top brass at Barclays are paying themselves £500,000 a year. That means the top brass in the government should be paying themselves £500,000 a year. That's not going to fly with anybody. It's not going to fly with the people who have got lots of money. It's not going to fly with the people who haven't got lots of money. It's not going to fly with the people in the middle.
Yeah.
Idealistically, it's going to piss off the Marxist, communist, socialist groups. It doesn't do anyone any favors. But if you could turn around and say, actually, we've improved public services, people have got more money in their pockets at the end of every month. We're not in any active wars. That's great. Let's see how long we can live in that world for. All of these things, if they are politicking to the point they should be, where instead of funding multiple conflicts, if they don't want to call them wars, conflicts globally, is the only route to market they have for political pressure and how to resolve political issues. If you are going to get involved, and there's arguments for and against, then maybe actually just going to the negotiating table and pouring some aloe vera over the situation to soothe the redness a little bit is probably a little bit more valuable. It's more valuable to lives that are being lost in conflicts, and it's a little bit more valuable, moralistically and ethically speaking, when you're in a country that is taking part in these conflicts that you may or may not agree with. But that is probably a little bit too far out the box for anyone to agree with.
But Jay, I think we could resolve this very easy. I think we can get rid of the 650 members of Parliament, and us, our little group can take over. President Lawrence. President Howard, President Rusinek.
Amazing.
Even better, President Charison.
Before we wrap up, I think it would be good to say, if you were choosing and I guess you are choosing on a daily basis. But if you were choosing where to be on which side, would you be rather buying short lease flats, or would you be rather buying freehold ground rents right now?
Wow, that is a great question. In actual fact, it's very bizarre. I had a call this week from a chap, and he actually is interested in buying anything that's sub 30 years. And he said, I'm looking for anything sub 30 years as a freeholder or as a lessee. I thought it was an interesting trying to put his bet, I couldn't quite understand his, but he was taking his bets. I know you love that period, Jay. You love the 30 years. That's your sweet spot, isn't it?
It's a real pickle of a time to be a freeholder or a leaseholder, actually. And I mean, that guy, you have to think he's probably looking at an arbitrage on a very particular level, because he'll be able to, if he can take the cap off on one side and put it on the other.
Yes,
I think there are ways to make money. I think if you're looking at sub 30 years as a leaseholder, to be buying sub 30-year leases, the avatar of freeholder that you're buying from has to be absolutely spot on. Because if you're looking at the pension funds, or you're looking at someone who owns 5 or 6 freeholds, and you think, well, these people are, before anything kicks off, while we're in the period of unknown, why don't we approach them outside of the Section 42 and offer them X? And then it's up to that freeholder to go, well, do I take X here, or do I look at half X in 6 months? And as a freeholder in that year range, you would also be sitting there thinking, why didn't I mail shop, once I own this, all of the leaseholders, and let's say the leasehold to extend now is worth 35. Why don't I offer it to them at 27.5?
Yes.
Why don't I just bank what can be banked now? I quite like that. Whoever you spoke to, I think has hopefully, and it's not always the case with short leasehold buyers, has got their head screwed on and is thinking about metrics that actually make sense. But that, if I was to do that, that would be my route to market on both sides of the fence.
Yeah, he was someone who's experienced and had done well from both sides previously. But I think I would go for the freeholds, because I think they are discounted now. And there's always some risk. There's some risk with everything. But I think I would go for the freeholds.
Yeah, nice one. I think there's also much less competition for buying freeholds rather than buying the short lease flats, because the short lease flat always appears cheap, and you always compete with people who are not professional buyers. They're just buyers because
we've sold at Network. We've sold a lot of leases of 30 odd years, and we've always been astonished how well we've done. But of course, if you do buy it at maybe a more reasonable price, a 30-year lease, and you don't want to extend, I can remember probably 30 years ago selling a property. It was in Nestles Avenue in Hayes in Middlesex, and I don't know why I can just always remember this one. And the chap who bought it was about 65 years old, and he said, "This is 30-year lease. I will never want to extend the lease. This is a great return for me. For the amount I'm paying for it, I'm going to get a tremendous rent. I'm going to get the same rent as the flat below, which might have a 999-year lease, but I'm paying half of it. So I'm getting a double return. And, in 30 years' time, won't be here." I mean, perhaps he's still alive at 95. I don't know. But, probably his theory was right, maybe, for him.
There we go. Amazing.
And that's the great thing about property. Everyone looks at things in a slightly different way.
Exactly.
And that's the beauty of it. I mean, I always like things with angles. If you've got an angle, I mean, you do as well. The angles, it might be an angle that you're looking at is completely different to another buyer.
Definitely.
But that's the beauty of it.
Definitely. And those angles depend very much on personal circumstances and position of every person, and everyone sees things from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Amazing. Guy, thank you so much for joining us, especially at the time that
Adam, thank
you are in.
for letting me join your merry group. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope I've added some value to you, and I hope the listeners and watchers viewers have enjoyed it.
Brilliant. How can people get in touch with you guys and at Network with you personally?
Absolutely. So gc@networkauctions.co.uk, or if you just look up Guy Charison, it comes up quite easily. We've got guycharison.com as well, and pretty easily accessible. my phone number 01344 851 007. Please don't phone me now. It's still early on Sunday morning. But anytime. Delighted to have a chat. It's always nice to have a chat with anyone about property.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.
And yeah, let's have you again on the chat soon.
And to Adam, have a safe flight back.
Yes.
Amazing.
Have a great week, everyone.
Have a great week, everyone.